Wow, there's a lot of you out here tonight. Anyway, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out here tonight. I appreciate it. For anyone that doesn't know me, I'm David, and I'm a senior in high school. And as Justin already said, I'm going to be talking about the Imago Dei, which is Latin for the image of God. Now, the Imago Dei is associated uniquely and specifically with humans. Nothing else is made in the image of God. No animals, no birds, nothing else. And it's clearly written in Genesis 1:27, which communicates, so God created man in his own image. In his own image, God created man. See, I think it's important to first note that God isn't one to waste words. Yet in Genesis 1:27, he repeated himself, essentially saying the same thing. This was not done by accident. There are no accidents in the Word of God. Therefore, I believe this was done for a purpose which is that we pay very close attention to what he said. Let's take a further look into where the image of God is presented in the Bible. It is mentioned in Colossians, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, Hebrews, and Genesis twice. I believe it's important that we understand the intended meaning of the word image. The word image is most likely falsely construed in most of our minds as a digital image, or something that is an exact representation of something else. Whatever it is that we think is most likely not the intended meaning of the word image in this context. See, unfortunately, a dictionary definition is not going to work for image, because while the term Imago Dei is Latin, Genesis was originally written in Hebrew. Therefore, the root of the word image is not the Latin word imago, but the word found in Genesis 1:27, which is the Hebrew word tselem. The word tselem in Hebrew conveys the idea of an object similar to or representative of something else, but not identical to it. Tselem is much like the English words shape, resemblance, figure, or shadow. You see, we are not a direct image of God. By looking around this room at each other, you could not possibly say that you know what God looks like. You could not draw a picture of God by looking around at each other. In the same way, you wouldn't look at a dove and say, that is peace. Yet, a dove can still represent the idea of peace, and we can understand that. Similarly, Tselem does not refer to what we look like, but is referring to how we as humans are similar to God in other ways. Without going too in depth, I believe it's important to understand that there are two groups that classify the attributes of God, the communicable and the incommunicable. All that means is that there are some things about God that we can never experience, like being all-powerful or all-knowing or unchangeable. But there are some things, some of God's attributes that we can experience, such as justice, mercy, love, truthfulness. But it's so much more than that. For any of the student leaders here, I'm about to criticize us as a whole, but I ask that everyone can hear what I'm about to say with an open mind. Last week, after our student leadership meeting, I was talking to Justin, and I told him that as leaders, I really wish that we were more vulnerable with each other. Some of us are so close and hang out all the time, yet we don't know the first thing about each other's struggles. We laugh and joke around and have a good time, but how close are we actually? Would we go to one another when something goes wrong in our lives? Occasionally we'll open up impromptu by a question from Justin, but majority of the time we deflect with humor and give the bare minimum. I'm in no way innocent of this. In fact, I might be the most guilty of this in our group. So let me be the first to correct this. Since I joined this youth group, I've spent the last 6 months of my life hiding my life from everyone here. I've put on a mask and showed you guys only the good stuff. It's so simple to lose sight of what it means to be made in the image of God. Forgetting that our value and worth is tied directly to the perfect image of God is easy when we get caught up in life's struggles. Me being here tonight at youth group is a testimony to the wonderful ways that God works in our lives. For those of you that don't know, I lived and played soccer in Germany for all my junior year. The freedom that comes with that at 16 years old is unparalleled. On days off, I would go with my teammates and take a train to Amsterdam, and we'd hang out there for the day. On other days, we'd take our bikes out at night and ride around all night, and then have training in the morning. To everyone here, this sense of freedom is probably pretty desirable, but it comes with a silver lining. You see, being made in the image of God means that we also have free will. We have the free will to choose to worship God. We have the free will to choose to go to church on every Sunday and read the Bible every day. But free will also means that we can choose the opposite. We can choose to not pray, not go to church, and live a life that is separate from God. And that's what I had chosen. I spent a year making patterns and habits that were not good for my walk with Christ. I was serving myself and the world and no one else. When my dad came to visit me on my birthday, I was shocked when he started praying before we ate. I had forgotten about prayer. That should have served as a warning sign, but God knew that I needed a whole lot more than that to come back to Him. In April 2021, my world was rocked when I was told that I had to fly home for surgery. I was angry with God and asking Him how He could let this happen to me. How ironic is it that I lived the past few months of my life completely separate from God, yet as soon as something bad happens, I blame God for my problems. I spent the summer on crutches, recovering from surgery and doing my best not to get angry with God. On the morning of July 23rd last year, I was woken up to my dad crying on the phone. My dad was in Montana and received news that Liam had died. Liam, who was not my biological brother, but was the boy I grew up with and the closest person I'd ever had to know a brother, was found dead in his room 2 days earlier. This news tore my family up. I didn't see much of my mom after that, and my dad was grieving in Montana. I was supposed to leave for Spain in 2 weeks, and I had never felt more lost in my life. My dad ended up coming back a few days before we left, but he was not the same person that left earlier. My dad traveled with me to Spain, and I started my tryout with the team, but once again, I was on my own, living in a dorm. Before that day in Madrid, I had cried maybe 3 times in the past 4 years, and 2 of those were because of Liam. The point is, I don't cry. Actually, at one point, a true story, I asked my mom if there was something that was wrong with me, because I had not cried in such a long time. But over the course of the next week, I cried throughout every day. The world had never felt so big, and I had never felt so alone. A combination of anxiety, loneliness, and depression consumed me. I couldn't text my parents because they were both dealing with Liam, and I didn't want to be vulnerable with my friends, so I went to nobody. I didn't even try to pray or read the Bible. If you would have asked me then what the top worst days of my life were, I would have said it was those first 7 days. As the next week came by, though, I would have said it was those last 7 days, and I hadn't even seen the worst yet. On August 28th, I had my first game with the team. We won, but looking back to that day, winning is the last thing I think about. On the drive back to where I was staying, my dad looked pretty distressed, but I didn't think anything else had happened. I just assumed he was still dealing with the death of Liam. I got out of the car, and he got out with me, and I could see the tears in his eyes. Before that moment, I had never seen my dad shed more than a few tears at a time. And he just grabbed me, and he hugged me, and he said these words I'll never forget. "Son, I think your mother's leaving me." After we left, I didn't see him for a few weeks, and I couldn't tell you how long I sat on those steps outside crying. I had no idea what to do. See, I put all my sense of worth and identity into the people around me and the sport I played. But now I no longer had anyone around me, and I couldn't care less with the sport that I was supposed to love. What I didn't know then was that being made in the image of God means that my worth is connected to my Creator. My self-worth has nothing to do with soccer or the people around me. No one can tell me that I'm less than I am. And the same is true for everyone here tonight. God made every single one of us in His image, and He died for every single one of us the same. But when I finally got the courage to go back inside the house, God still wasn't the first person I went to, and I didn't open my Bible or pray. Instead, I called someone that a lot of you know pretty well, and not in a good way. But I sat there on the phone, crying to her for a long time. 2 days later, I found out that after a year of dating, that she started cheating on me when I left for Spain. And I say it somewhat lightheartedly, but at that moment, it was the hardest hitting news yet. Nothing quite hurt like that betrayal. But it took God taking every person out of my life before I finally turned to Him. The next 2 weeks were even worse than the previous. I lost nearly 15 pounds, barely slept, and watching TV or listening to music was too painful because it only reminded me of the people that I'd lost. God gave me no choice but to return to Him. My days were spent listening to sermons, reading the Bible, and praying. All day from when I got up at 9 and left for practice at 6, I hardly touched my phone those days. After being away from God for so long, He welcomed me back with open arms, just like the prodigal son. But He still wasn't done with me. The next 2 weeks, after finding out about her cheating, were the hardest yet. There was only one friend I called and told the entire time I was in Spain. I finally reached the point where I couldn't be there any longer, and I came home. Being home wasn't much better, though. My mom had moved out of the house, and I was trying to live with my dad, who wasn't making many long-term plans. After being back for a week, my 5-year-old dog got cancer and died a few days later. I spent my days trying to get out of the house as fast as possible and coming back only so that I had a place to sleep. Many relatives and friends offered that I could move in with them if needed, but I couldn't leave my dad alone. But my story doesn't end here. For God promises in Deuteronomy 31:8, the Lord himself goes before you, and he will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. Do not be afraid. Do not be discouraged. I was looking for as many activities as I could to stay out of the house and stay busy. And one of them was this youth group. This youth group became a home for me, and a place where I could escape, and a place where I could be happy for a little bit. I dove headfirst into the church, and ended up going to youth group here, and another one on Wednesday nights. What first started out as an escape became a passion for me. I wanted to be here as much as possible. I joke about it now, but up until this year, I never understood how people had time for youth group. Between practice, homework, and working out, there wasn't a lot of time in my day for youth group. In my mind, youth group was for the people who didn't play sports and had nothing better to do on a school night. And now look at me. God's got a funny sense of humor. If you tuned me out for the past few minutes, I honestly can't blame you. But you're going to want to tune back in to hear this next part. What does being made in God's image mean for you? Being the only beings in the universe that God decided to make in his own image means that every person in this room has innate value beyond every other created thing. Meaning in your lowest moment, you were just as valuable and worthy as in your best moment. God does not need us, but he created us anyway, with the purpose of having a relationship with him. He loves us despite our failures, our flaws, our insecurities. He made us in his image so that we would glorify him and engage in a loving relationship with him forever. God shared with us the ability to have free will and make our own decisions. We can discern right from wrong. Being made in his image means that no matter what we look like, no matter what our insecurities tell us, we are all still made in the perfect image of God. God knows his plan for my life. He tore me down. He's rebuilding me from the ground up. In these past few months, I've begun to learn to trust God and love him in a way that I never imagined. At this moment, I still couldn't tell you what God's plan is for my life. I don't know where he's leading me or what he wants me to do, but I will trust him. What's God's plan for you? Pray with me. God, I thank you for this day today. I thank you for allowing us to be here and gathered in your name. I thank you for the trials, and I thank you for the failures, the ups and the downs. I pray that we can see you in everything that we do, and we become closer to you. We love you, God, and in your name, amen.
Wow, that was awesome. This is by far the most fun I've had at youth group. Hearing you guys. From last week, we had Ellen and Avery leading worship. This week we get Avery and Billy. Ethan, now David. It's so rich for me, and I know it's rich for a lot of you. Being able to hear from each other and hear your stories, it's very powerful. And so I get excited each and every week to come back. Someone says, like, who gets to go next? Who gets to go next? Maybe it's you. If you feel like you have something you want to share, we've got a couple of amazing ladies coming up next week, but maybe in a couple of weeks, maybe it's you that has something you would like to share, just like David and Ethan did. Maybe it's your time. What we're going to do right now is we're going to close in worship at the end of tonight. But for the next 15, 20 minutes, what I want you to do is going to be a little bit of a different twist on small group time. We're going to try to, as much as we can,